Hey, welcome back. Well, we have a show for you today. Here's a question. Have we as a country really changed in all ways and in all good ways since the 1800s, the 1700s? Well, in some ways, yes. In other ways, absolutely not. We still have a long way to go in terms of segregation and equality. Today, we're going to have an amazing show with an amazing person. My name is Dacquino. Our guest is Dr. Oliver Shands. Dr. Annette Oliver Shands. Annette, we are friends. We go back a little bit. We are in a writer's group together. I have seen some amazing work from you. You've come a long way, and you crossed a lot of bridges, climbed a lot of walls, and today you're going to share some of your experiences with us. Talk to us. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me on your program.
Our pleasure.
It's a nice chance to talk about segregation, because when we talk about segregation, we're actually talking also about some of the situations that we're dealing with today, even though we're looking back when we look at segregation. We're talking about racism, which is very much a part of today's world.
Yep.
And we're also talking about divisiveness, which our world is so very divided. Our society is so very divided right now, perhaps more or as much as ever before. It's very much divided in so many ways. But now, if I tell you about my story of segregation, I would have to go back to the places where I've lived.
Yep.
And that would mean starting with Mount Vernon, New York.
Really?
I'm originally from Mount Vernon, New York.
Wow. I taught in Pelham, right next door there.
Yes, yes. And in Mount Vernon, New York, when I was growing up there, there were no signs. There was no corporal punishment in the schools. The schools were integrated, but there was segregation. I had a white playmate named Rose on one side of the house, and a colored playmate named Annette, same as myself, on the other side. Yeah, so we distinguished ourselves. She was big Annette, and I was little Annette. And she was an only child, and she lived there with her mother and father. Now, Rose was the youngest of 6 children, and she lived there with her mother and father and 6 children on the other side of the house. Rose was a lot younger than her brothers and sisters. And in fact, all of her brothers and sisters considered her as their baby, or the baby.
The baby.
So
right.
she was a younger child. And I played with both of them. Those were my playmates, Rose and Annette. Playing with Rose meant I would cheer for the Yankees. Because she would cheer for, both Rose and Annette were both older than I. So they influenced me a lot more than I influenced them. But playing with Annette meant playing with Rose meant cheering for the Yankees. But playing with Annette, I had to cheer for the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Oh, yeah.
I had to cheer for Jackie Robinson.
Oh,
there was no way
You're right.
that I could live with Annette
right.
and not be cheering for Jackie Robinson. So I learned that I had to cheer for Jackie Robinson. That was my role. And but in school, so that was in play. We played together very well until I think by the time Rose became incensed to be aloof from us.
Yeah.
I was gone. I was no longer my family had moved to Illinois.
Oh, wow.
So, but Annette knew about it when Rose decided not to talk to her. So, but Rose never decided not to talk to me because she hadn't been infiltrated with that kind of racism.
Right.
But her family never was. And when growing up, Rose's family invited me over for naps. When Rose didn't want to take her nap, I had to go with Rose so she could take her nap. And so
Wait, you put her to sleep?
I don't think we did anything but watch television,
There
really.
you
She
go.
had a TV in the room, and so we watched TV. But one day, when I was at school, I had Mrs. Cohn was my teacher at school in Mount Vernon, my second grade teacher. And we were doing a Columbus Day play. And I was in the play. I had a part in the play. It wasn't a speaking part. And I think there was another African-American child in the play. There were maybe
wow.
2 or 3 of us in the classroom of 30 or so that were African-American. And she may have had a speaking part, but I didn't. I just had to look there and be pretty and amazed and marvel at Columbus, what he was doing. He was coming in, and there were 4 or 5 of us who were girls, and we had to have on period costumes, long dresses.
Wow.
So what happened was that the only long dress I had was from being a flower girl. And so my grandmother's sister had made me the dress to be a flower girl. And it had a lot of lace and a lot of bows. And so when we had to do the practice, I wore my flower girl dress. But my grandmother's sister was going to make me a special dress for the play. And it wasn't going to be a flower girl dress.
Oh.
It was going to be more of a period dress that wasn't as fancy as this flower girl dress. But it so happened that Mrs. Cohn loved the flower girl dress. And my grandmother's sister couldn't make it right away because she had to make it when she came home from work. So she had to do it a little bit at a time.
Right.
And so by the time she got it ready, when she got it ready, I wore it. And I didn't wear the flower girl dress anymore. I wore the dress she made me to wear in the play. And it so happened that Mrs. Cohn did not like that dress as much as she liked the flower girl dress. And so I went to school because with my dress for the play that my grandmother's sister had made, especially for the play. And Mrs. Cohn sent me home to get the flower girl dress because she liked that better. Well, nobody was home. So I went there and I sat home on the steps and I started crying because my teacher had sent me home. So Rose's mother came over to see why I was home and why I was crying. And Rose's mother and Rose's sister came. They were home and they came to see why I was crying and what had happened. So through the sobs, I told them what had happened. And so they told me, come home with us. We're going to call that principal, and we're going to get that teacher because she had no business sending you home.
Oh.
So I'm a second grader, and I've been told to go home and get another dress.
Oh, no.
And everybody's at work, so nobody's home. And so Rose's mother and Rose's sister gets on the phone and talks to the principal and tells her, no, we can't have this. She's not supposed to do that. And so I go back to school, and I wear the dress that my grandmother's sister made for me to wear in the play. So that was when I learned that it was okay to give a tongue lashing to a teacher when she didn't do the right thing.
And for a long time, if you were black, you did not talk back.
Well, I did. I learned from Rose's mother and Rose's sister that if the teacher wasn't doing right, the teacher had to have a tongue lashing. And so I was very outspoken with my teachers. I had to give 2 tongue lashings in my teaching, in my school years. And the first tongue lashing I gave was to a teacher who wanted to divide the classroom. This was in Indiana, and it was my first day in the classroom, and she had decided that she had divided the classroom in her mind between the not so smart and the smart. And I told her, and I was raising my hand on the not so smart side. She gave a lot of busy work. and she had me sitting over on the not so smart side. And so when she got to the smart side of the class, she was asking questions, and I kept raising my hand, and she never would call on me. So I said, so after a while, I blurted out, okay, this was my time to blurt, to give the teacher a tongue lashing. And so I tongue lashed her, and I told her that, you know, you have this class divided in two, the dumb smart side and the smart side, and you've got me on the dumb side, and I belong on the smart side. So she was quite taken.
Oh, yeah.
And so she gave me a seat on the other side. She assigned me a
Wow.
seat to go in the back of the room on the other side of the
Back
classroom.
in the room,
And then she gave a test. And she was going to give this unannounced quiz to show me that I really did belong on the other side of the room. So it happened that I got the highest grade on the test. So she came back to look at my paper to see if I had cheated. She looked at everybody else's paper. But okay, so she figured I hadn't cheated. And so she moved me to the front of the room.
Oh, my.
And then she proceeded later that afternoon. She asked me to grade papers for her, and I had my first job. I had $1 a week grading papers. That was my very first job.
Oh, my
So
God.
that came from giving a tongue lashing to a teacher.
Yep.
Now, the second time I had to give a tongue lashing to the teacher was because she used the N word.
Oh, my
And
God.
there were three of us, and this was in algebra. This one was in high school. It was in the same town. And the teacher used the N word. She started with an eeny, meeny, miny, mo joke.
Oh.
And we all three had our hands up, and everybody put their hand down except me. But so my classmate Thelma jerked my hand down. You put your hand down. So she pulled my hand down and said, you know, we can't do this. And so, being a little bit belligerent, I put my hand. I said, she's not going to finish that. She's not going to say that. She wouldn't dare say that. But she did say it.
Oh, my God.
And so then my classmates said, okay, we've got to leave the classroom. We've got to walk out. We're not going to take this. We're going to walk out. So I said, well, let's give her a chance, and let's make her say she's sorry, and then we can stay. And so she said, okay, if you want to make her say she's sorry, I'll go with that. We won't walk out. We'll make her apologize. So we went up to the class. The three of us walked up to her desk. The bell rang shortly thereafter, and we walked up to her desk, and I was a spokesperson because I said I was going to be the one to make her say she was sorry. But my two classmates were there to support me, and we all went up together, and I told her she had no business saying what she said. And so she says to me, well, what did I say? And I said, you know what you said. And she wanted me to repeat what she said.
Yeah.
I said, no, I'm not going to repeat it, but you know what you said. And so I said, you shouldn't have said it, and you should say, I'm sorry, because you really shouldn't have said that. And so it was very obvious to me that she wasn't going to say she was sorry.
Wow. Wow.
So I had to give her a little bit of a tongue lashing.
Yeah.
And I told her, well, you know, if I'm one, you're one, because it takes one to know one. And she was quite upset with me. But she didn't say anything, but I don't think she ever tried that again.
No.
So those were the two times I did give a tongue lashing.
So those things helped create the Annette we have today. The strength to say, I'm not less than anyone. I have a right to be the smart person I am, and I have a right to fight for who I am. And you did. You became a PhD. Now, these things are things that upset me because there's a lot of people out there who don't know how to give tongue lashings. And there's a lot of people who are just quiet about who and what they are. But in addition to being a PhD, you're a minister. That means you work with people to help them be who they are. Tell me a little bit about the Annette that went from high school to become a doctor.
What
are those things that you live by?
Well, I should perhaps talk a little bit about my parents
Okay,
in order to define who I am.
good, good.
My parents met at Wilberforce University. They were very,
So your parents were very educated.
yes, and they were very kind to people, and people recognized their kindnesses. And wherever we went, my father helped the people with their problems. They came to him with problems, and he would always address
No, he
their
was a
problems.
minister as well?
He was a minister,
Ah, okay.
and we moved around to different places, and he was a minister. So they were very courageous too. When we did things that were not typical, we would travel through the South,
Wow.
the segregated South.
That's hard enough.
And that was something you really
Now,
didn't
what
do.
years are we talking about?
We're talking about when we couldn't go in the restrooms or the hotels.
Yeah, so like the 50s?
40s.
40s.
40s and
Yeah.
50s.
Oh, yeah, they were
So,
rough.
well, 40s and 50s, I guess. 50s maybe too.
Yeah.
And there was you couldn't stay in a hotel.
No.
So traveling, you had to have some ways to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so what happened, what my father did, we were in a connectional church. He was in a connectional church. And he had a directory of different ministers in the church in all the states that we would travel through. And he would call them up and say, look, and that was a wonderful time in the way that the community would band together and have so much respect for one another. Because even if we went to a conference, a church conference, and people came from out of town, they couldn't stay in hotels. They had to stay in homes of the congregants. And there was such a respect for one another. We respected their home, and they respected our being there, and there was a joy to be able to provide this service. And that's gone. But that was a part of the world that was special.
Yeah, and a part of the world that America didn't really see and didn't really know about. You know, it was a different culture.
Right. And when we had to eat, we didn't eat at restaurants on the road. What my parents would do, we'd always find a big supermarket. We wouldn't go in a small one.
Yeah.
You had to go in a big one.
Yeah, otherwise you get thrown out.
And we would get my cold cuts. And my mother would get cold cuts, and we would make them in the car. She would make them in the car. And bread and cold cuts and mustard, nothing that required refrigeration for a long period of time. And so we had that, and we would eat them on the roadside tables. You know, they had picnic tables along the roadside, and we would stop there. And that's how we traveled. At nighttime, if we weren't in a neighborhood where there was a church person who would take us in, we would go to drive-in movies. And my father would sleep because he was the one who was doing all the driving.
Yeah.
And we would get to watch the movie. And that's the way we traveled.
Wow.
Now, through the South. My mother.
And these are educated people who really earned their place in society, but were denied it. Yeah, one of my good friends, probably one of the best friends of my life, was Roy Campanella. And Roy was a Dodger catcher. I'm sure you know of him. And I hung around with him for about 3 years. And he filled me with so much understanding of what it takes to be who you are in a world that won't accept you for who you are. And he was the top catcher in the country. And he had the same thing. When the rest of the team stayed at fine hotels, he had to go to backroom hotels. He couldn't eat in the restaurants that everyone else ate in. And he had to go through a whole lot of real tough times. And it was a shame because on one hand, they applauded his home runs, and on the other hand, they did not applaud him and did not accept him for who he was. And it was difficult.
Now, I had a problem similar to that. when I was in what they call the Junior Classical League, I was studying Latin and Greek. Mm-hmm. And every year during the time that I was in school, they had a convention for the students who were high school students who were in Latin and Greek. And it so happened that when I decided I wanted to go, I liked to go. Anytime there was a trip, I wanted to go.
Yeah, sure.
So my Latin teacher told, she wasn't one of the ones who was organizing. I think the Latin teachers who were in organization the year I went came out of Texas. And so when they had to assign us rooms to share with each other. Oh, and they told my Latin teacher, that they weren't going to give me a room because I was a Negro or whatever.
Yeah,
and they were not going to give me a roommate. And my Latin teacher said, "Oh, yes, you are. You are going to give her a roommate."
Whoa.
And I had a roommate.
Yeah, and fortunately that roommate didn't have that way of thinking.
Well,
oops, I take it back.
But I did have a roommate.
Oh, you had a roommate.
Yes.
Not necessarily a willing roommate.
No, she wasn't willing. I think the people from Texas had told her, you room with her, but you don't have to be there. You don't have to do anything with her. You just do what you have to do in the room. And she was okay with that. But I did find that even in New Mexico, I think that convention might have been in New Mexico, which is close to Texas. And so I did have pen pals from New Mexico that wrote from that Latin club group.
Right.
And then the other time that I think there was that kind of we're not going to let you in. I was trying to think I think there was another time, but it kind of slips my mind right now. But that was one when the Latin teacher said, "Oh yes, she is going to have a roommate," and she made sure that I had a roommate. And I had some good teachers. I had some good and some not so good. I had both. That Latin teacher was a jewel.
So now, Annette, you are, in addition to being a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
you are a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and you've written a number of things.
Mm-hmm.
You write poems. When you write, what do you write about?
Well, one of my recent poems, I may have read it in the workshop, had to do with the Statue of Liberty.
Really?
Yes, because the original Statue of Liberty was not the Statue of Liberty, was a runaway slave, was with a chain in her hand.
Really?
And that came from France to this country. And the Americans said, "No, we're not going to have that. We're not going to have that." And so they sent it back. And so
I don't know how I missed that story. Wow.
And if you look on the Statue of Liberty that's there now, the chain is around her foot, but they wouldn't let it.
Dangle,
you
by
couldn't
your arm.
in your arm and show it to them like that. You know, that would make the Southerners a little too mad.
Yeah, yeah.
So I had just seen a program on television. I knew about that history. I read about it. I think in the '60s when there was so much coming out about the African American history. And so I wrote a poem about that.
Wow.
Because I was in the writers group, and there was this guy who was writing about statues. I said, "Oh, here's my chance to write about."
Yes.
And there was also a program on the television that was about the Statue of Liberty that's there in the harbor. And of course, I'd been there, and I would take my friends from Indiana when they would come up. We'd go to the Statue of Liberty and see
Did you
different
commit
parts
that
of
poem to memory?
Let's see if I can remember part of it. I dare say, I wish I had brought it. It's in the car.
Yeah.
I dare say, before you ever held high that torch in your hand, you held high a broken chain. I dare say, to announce freedom to the captive, to announce liberty for all, oh Lady Liberty, something like that. It's not, I'm not really there. Oh, I dare say, let the truth be known, the brazen truth, brazen enough to stand there in the harbor, brazen enough to stand in the water, let the truth be known. Claim your history. Claim your history. You are more like, and there's a part that goes, I dare say, because one nation under God refused a gift from another nation that was your former self, not like this self you are now.
Oh, that's interesting. That's well
I
done.
dare say, and then I have it out of context because I guess I don't remember my poems that well. I dare say you are more like Sojourner Truth, who would say, who was as fit as any man and would say in a minute, ain't I a woman?
Wow.
I dare say you're more like Harriet Tubman, who on the run, who was ever ready with her gun, because freedom had to be won. When all was said and done, freedom had to be won. I dare say you're more like Miss Hallie Q. Brown, who would say out loud from London town, what do you have in your hand? I dare say you're more like Rosa Parks, who knew how to stand up in order to sit down. And then I think the last person, I dare say you're more like Gwendolyn Brooks, who always had a brood, but knew how to give good looks and books and love and time to her brood. And then I think I end up with, I dare say you're more like Fannie Lou Hamer, who would say, I am so sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I think I call that hidden history, which is something, a play on that movie that was out, Hidden Figures, which I think talked about the history that we're not known, history that's not shown about the race.
Right.
And so.
Well, Annette, I dare say we are just about out of time.
Yes.
It's been a long road, and people like you have guided us down that road. It can't be a hidden history anymore. It has to be out there. We have to hold our heads high, and we have to respect each other for who we are in the world we live in. Thank you so much for being part of this show today. Thank you, Doctor,
Thank you.
for becoming a doctor in a world that tried to hold you back.
Well, thank you.
Don't let anybody hold you back from being who you really are. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for being one-on-one with Dr. Annette Oliver Shands. Thank you for being here.